Good evening. It's always a blessing to be able to gather together to worship and study God's Word. And if you are visiting or you don't have one, then there are outlines on the communion table. I don't have this down on our paper, but if you do have your Old Testament, I'd like for us to read part of a paragraph in Exodus. And we're going to be in Exodus chapter 19, and we'll be at the foot of Mount Sinai. I know the context is very, very different, but the single greatest act of deliverance in the whole of the Old Testament is God bringing the people out of Egypt. And when you look at world history, there's just nothing else like that a God would come to a group of people, and we don't know how long they've been slaves. We know that they've been there over 400 years, and to deliver an entire nation from slavery, from one of the greatest powers of the world at that time. Just nothing has ever been done like that. And while it's very, very different, the only other greater act of deliverance is going to be Christ's death on the cross. And so we're told in Exodus 19, and look how specific. On the third new moon, after the people of Israel had gone forth out of the land of Egypt, on that day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. And when they set out from Rephidim and came to the wilderness of Sinai, they encamped in the wilderness, and there Israel encamped before the mountain. And one of the things we're going to be looking at tonight, and this is just what I love about ongoing Bible study, I don't know that I've ever given a lesson just primarily on the Levites as we're going to look at tonight. And as we're going to see in a little bit, they organize the camp, and we've used this term earlier. God literally has come to dwell among and even to camp out among his people, and that's why we had to have a tabernacle and a holy, and then especially a holy of holies, so that a holy God can literally dwell in the midst of oftentimes an unholy people. But as we're going to see, the Levites then camped around the tabernacle. And then when you read the descriptions, there's 3 tribes on this side, and they divide them up roughly by size. And so all the tribes have a position around the tabernacle, but it's going to be the Levites who are the ones who have their tents and their camp closest to the tabernacle. Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him out of the mountain. Now, this is where it would just be fabulous to be able to hear the voice. What did it sound like when God called to him? When our son's voice changed, it happened in about a month. And every Sunday, Luke can sing one line off the bottom of the bass scale. When I've got a cold, I can always hit the bottom one, but I can't hardly ever get one bottom just off the bottom. Well, every time we had a VBS and God was to speak, then the people of the east side said, "Luke, we want you to be the voice of God." And so here this VBS thing going on, and you're going to hear, "Moses." Moses. You hear this very, very deep announcer-type voice. We don't know what God sounded like. But on the other hand, there are times between the earthquake and the lightning and the thunder and everything else, the people are just terrified. Moses, you go up and talk. You go up and talk with him, and in his own time and in his own way, but still, it's up to our imagination because we don't have a way to hear it. But when I read this, I just try to think, what would it have sounded like to literally hear the voice of God? "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the people of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. And what lovely imagery. And I rescued you, but I bore you on eagle's wings, and I brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you will obey my voice and keep my covenant, and I want to check your translation. Mine just says, you shall be my own possession. Do you have anything else in your translations besides my own possession? Treasured possession. Fabulous. And we just touched on this when we were going through the reading. Real estate, help me, Kelly, township, section, range. And you can go back to it. You can find the location of it. It is, yes, we have earthquakes and stuff, but it's there. You can come back and measure it. This, and it's a bit of a loose translation, but it's also appropriate. We could use the word, you're my portable treasure. What was yours again, Bill? Treasured possession. And God says, I chose you, I brought you out. We're not going to turn to it, but it's easy to remember. Deuteronomy 7, the perfect number. Oh, I chose you, not because you were strong, not because you were mighty, not because you were many, but I chose you when you were weak and when you were few, and virtually when you were helpless. You were slaves. And so God's election and God's choosing of Israel, this is an overstatement, but it's closer to it. It was nearly in spite of rather than because. And if you'll anticipate, in February, the word love is going to come up. And one of the things that's so important about the idea of agape is that the things that are in most of our songs and the things that are in culture, it's oftentimes either a visual or an emotional, oh, I'm attracted to, even something simple like I love ice cream. God's love is nearly a love not because of, but nearly in spite of. My covenant which you broke over and over and over and again, and God still loves his people. And so rather than being real estate and a block, then God says, I chose you to be my portable treasure, my own possession. And then notice the rest of what he says. Among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine. And this will anticipate, Lord willing, next week. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now, Lord willing, because we've been doing kind of the type and the shadow, and here's the old and the new will come next week, we will look specifically at Jesus as the high priest under the new covenant. But something that to me is very, very significant is that, and you'll find the same thing in 1 Peter chapter 2, and we'll come to this next week. Once you were not a people, once you were not kind of anything, but again, God is going to choose, and he is going to want us as Christians to be a holy nation, and then what's the next word? Royal priesthood, and a people who are God's own possession. And of all things, and this is still just amazing, of all things, every religion in the first century had a temple except us. Didn't matter where you went. Rome, Greece, didn't make any difference at all. And especially when we look at the church in Ephesus, Lord willing, in March, you could put nearly 2 of the Acropolises on top of Mars Hill in Athens inside the Temple of Diana in Ephesus. One of the 7 wonders of the world. And if you've just seen the structure that's on the top in Athens there, and still the remains of it is still just fabulous, the Temple of Diana is about 3 times that size. And then here's this little group of people meeting either in someone's house or living room or something, and you'd have to nearly just feel dwarfed being Christians next to this humongous, majestic temple. Everyone had a temple except us. And this was one of the most startling things to people in the first century you are the temple of God. You are the temple of the Holy Spirit. And so God is going to redeem these people out of Egypt, out of slavery, and he wants them to become a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And here's going to be the type and the shadow, and we're going to come to this, Lord willing, next week. What a privilege, and it's not gender specific. What a privilege that every Christian can intercede, can approach God through Jesus on behalf of someone else and fulfill a role that much of it had been accompanied just by the priests and the Levites in the Old Testament. And we just have an enormous sense of blessing. But God's people, my portable treasure, a kingdom of priests, and a holy nation. Now, on our outline, if you'll look at the top, I want us to, and this is an example, we're going to look at this, but God is going to specifically choose the tribe of Levi. And if we go back just for a second, if you remember, Joseph has two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and he's wanting Jacob to bless them. And how many times does this happen in the book of Genesis? The younger one gets the blessing and the older one gets left out. Esau made some terrible tactical errors, but his brother Jacob made it easy for him to make errors. No ways, and they called him, Brother McCord would just call Jacob heel grabber. He was a guy who would just trip you if he just got the chance. And there's that reversal of the older brother and the younger brother. And, Joseph is thinking, bless his heart, Dad's getting old and his eyesight is dim. And Jacob crosses the hands and does the blessing on the younger brother. And this was kind of this reversal that took place. But God, as we're going to see, God is going to choose the tribe of Levi to be a tribe of priests and servants. And so that'll make 11. But then he's going to insert Manasseh and Ephraim to make the 12 tribes. So there are actually 13. And if you just go through the list, you do Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. And in that group, then that makes the 12 tribes. But when the people came out of Egypt, and we'll read this in a second, what was the cost? What compelled Pharaoh to finally say, let my people go? Death of the firstborn. And God is going to say of his people, rather than requiring the death of the firstborn physically, I'm going to choose the tribe of Levi, and I'm going to use the word kind of as a substitute. And rather than, they're going to take the place of like the death of the firstborn. And they were to offer the firstborn of crops and the firstborn of animals and other stuff at different times for sacrifices. And God's going to say, I brought you out, I delivered you at the cost of the firstborn of Egypt. And so I'm going to select Levi to be my special tribe. And then we're going to, as we're going to say, fill in with the two sons of Joseph to make the 12. And so that's why we're going to keep having this list of the 12 tribes of Israel. But the tribe of Levi is going to be dispersed among them and very separate. And God says, I'm going to choose Levi rather than the firstborn. So the Levites are going to be given some very specific responsibilities, and we'll just identify and highlight some of those. So when you just look for the word Levite, 80 times in the Old Testament, 3 times in the New Testament. Priest, 700 times in the Old Testament, 80 times in the New Testament. And the tribe of Levi are going to be chosen to specifically serve at the tabernacle. When they're traveling, they're given wagons and carts and other things. And remember the pillar of fire by night, the cloud by day. When the cloud moved, they moved. Wayne, I like to camp out, but wouldn't you get sick of it for 40 years? I'm not just trying to become one of the murmurers and the complainers, but I'm just saying one of the nice things about camping out is coming home. And to do that for 40 years, and every time this cloud moves, okay, let's break down the tabernacle. And you look at the structure and everything, and then, here's where it goes, and this is what happens when we put it here and there. Our youngest daughter's in-laws are fabulous tailgaters. And Annalise's father-in-law sometimes will cook stuff for 2 days. And they have one of those kind of extended type things. When he opens that up, there's not one place to stick your hand in the whole back of the vehicle. Everything has been measured, and we're talking about the table comes out, the chairs comes out, the ice chest comes out, and on and on. And he'll cook for 2 or 3 days getting ready, and when he opens that thing up, he's the only one that can put it back in, because this goes here, and this goes here, and this goes here. And I've just been amazed because I've seen him open it up, and I'm just thinking, literally, even on the sides, you can't stick your hand anywhere. Everything's been measured. This is what you'd have to do with all this tabernacle stuff. We take this down, this goes in this wagon, this goes here, and the Levites were the ones who did that. Anticipate. There are terms for slaves, and there are terms for servants, and there are terms in the New Testament for the people who serve very much like the Levites in a priestly function for God. It's like a service of worship. And twice in the book of Revelation, they will serve him. And I don't know what we will do, but anybody who could speak the universe into existence in 6 days is not lacking in creativity. And the term is, those of us who are saints and those of us who are servants, we will serve him night and day, and I think we'll be constructively busy doing something in form of service. Well, when I think of this and I hear this passage in the New Testament, especially Revelation, then I look back, and so here are these Levites, and this whole tribe then is dedicated to, initially, taking care of the tabernacle while we're on the move. Then when things become more permanent, they're going to be spread out into different cities. They still are responsible, and then later it will become the temple. We said this several months ago, but I still think it's important. This is just number 1, 2 at the top. All priests are Levites, but not all Levites are priests. Okay? And that's just a very important distinction. We used Oklahoma City, but let's use Guthrie. Everybody who lives in Guthrie is in Oklahoma. Okay? But not everybody in Oklahoma lives in Guthrie. So if you just take the tribe of Levi, then God's going to choose the family of Aaron and the descendants from that. And so within the larger group of the tribe of Levi are going to be the priests. And so anytime you see a priest, he is going to be a Levite. But there's a whole group of Levites who are going to help with the furnishings and the moving and everything else. And at other times, the sacrifices. Oh. In reading through, they have one of these restoration things, and some days they kill hundreds and thousands of animals for sacrifices and stuff. That's the Levites. Priests will help, but they were all involved in that priestly duty. And Aaron and his descendants are the ones chosen to be the high priest, very exclusive, and then as we'll see, Jesus will be our high priest, Lord willing, in the new covenant next week. So I want you to look at the first one. We've touched on this, but here's the physical, can I say physical responsibilities that the Levites are going to have. God's going to say to Levi, I want you to look after the tabernacle initially, and it's going to be the tabernacle in which their brethren, the priests, are going to serve. When Moses saw the people had broke loose, this is terrible, for Aaron had let them break loose to the derision of their enemies, Moses stood at the gate of the camp and said, who is on the Lord's side? Come to me. All the sons of Levi gathered around him. Okay? Moses has gone up on Mount Sinai. He's disappeared. And these people say, where did this guy Moses go from? And on and on. Let's make a golden calf. Or let's make something. And when we went through Exodus, this is very personal. This is just my personal opinion, but one of my votes for the biggest whopper, biggest lie in the Bible is, Moses, we just threw it in the fire and out jumped a calf. It's just so pathetic. a golden calf does not jump out of the fire, but Aaron knows that he's done wrong and just tells this terrible whopper, yep, the thing just jumped out of the fire. God is so incensed and so upset. Thou shalt not make any graven images. Thou shalt not have any idols and all these other things. And all of the core of those early 10 commandments about God have all been broken while Moses is on the mountain. This is going to get hard. Moses said, "Who is on the Lord's side? Put your sword on the side of you and go from gate to gate through the camp, and each of you kill his brother and his companion and his neighbor." And the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses. And that day, about 3,000 men of the people fell. And here's what's significant. Moses said, "Today to Levi, you have been ordained for the service of the Lord, each one at the cost of his son and his brother, so that he might bestow a blessing upon you this day." There may have been other times and other ways that God chose Levi, but the fact that they stepped forward when the people had been involved in all kinds of idolatry, immorality, and other stuff. And this is hard. One kinsman killing another, but the tribe of Levi killed 3,000 of the idolaters and the other people doing stuff. And God says, you've been ordained and you've been chosen. And this is at least one of the ways that God set aside Levi from all the other tribes that were within Israel. So here's one too, Exodus 28. These are the records of the tabernacle of testimony, the responsibility of the Levites under the direction of Ithamar, the son of Aaron the priest. Numbers 1:49. Of the tribe of Levi, you shall not take a census of them from among the people. And I think this is at the end of Numbers 21. It was 603,550 of the fighting men, roughly between 20 to that age group up. So, and just think about that. That's not under 20. That's not over 50. We have 603,550, and 2 of that group get into the promised land. I'm not a pessimist by nature, but when I hear, broad is the way that leads to destruction, and many there be that find it, of the capable fighting men who came out of Egypt, 603,548 of them died in the wilderness and didn't enter the promised land. I have taken the Levites instead of all the firstborn among the people of Israel. I have given the Levites as a gift to Aaron and his sons from among the people to do the service for the people of Israel at the tent of meeting, and to make atonement for the people of Israel, that there may be no plague among the people of Israel when the people of Israel come near the sanctuary. So when you come to number 2, when they finally get ready after wandering in the wilderness for 40 years for not entering the promised land initially, when they finally get ready to go in, they have numbered the tribes, they have done a census, but the only tribe that they didn't count was Levi. And what they're going to do is that they're going to partition and divide up the land roughly according to population and size. But what they're going to do is that the tribe of Levi is going to be given 48 cities on both sides of the Jordan. And so rather than having the area of Judah or Benjamin, which are going to be the 2 tribes that are going to continue on after the other tribes go into captivity, then the Levites are going to be dispersed throughout all of Israel, and they get the pasture land just around their city. And so then when you look at this, 13 of those cities are primarily just for priests, and then there's on either side of the Jordan, there are 3 cities of refuge on both sides, and if you accidentally kill someone and can virtually prove that, then you flee to the city of refuge, and the people there will protect you, and you live there until the death of the high priest. And then by law, you are then able to go home. And this, again, was Levites were involved in doing this. And so when you look at 2:1, here's your 48 cities, the 6 cities of refuge. And then in 2:2, those who fled to them, and you'll see underlined, until the death of the high priest. And after the high priest had died, presuming that you had been able to prove your innocence to that degree, then you were able to go back to your home. And if the relatives killed you, then the blood would be upon them. This becomes a very significant responsibility. I didn't even put this down because of time. I knew we wouldn't have time to get to it, but just in a couple of sentences. Also, when someone was found killed and they weren't sure what had happened, then men, especially from these 6 cities and others, were to determine the closest one, and someone from that city was to make atonement for what was called the shedding of innocent blood. And so this was kind of a major responsibility, and if someone was found killed and they don't know what happened and what took place, then we check, oh, he's closest to this particular city, so these guys then are responsible. They make an offering. This just so distresses me. The city of Jerusalem is finally destroyed because Manasseh shed so much. The streets of the city ran with blood, and Manasseh shed so much innocent blood that finally God told Jeremiah, don't pray for him. It's over. The clock is ticking. The best stats that I've been able to read is that so far our country has aborted 62 million babies. And we're about to make Hitler look like a kindergartner. And that grieves me to no end. And I just pray there's enough righteous people for God to restrain his wrath, because you can't take the blood of 62 million innocents with no repercussions from God. And so the Levites were in charge of these cities of refuge, and then when those innocent people or dead people were found, then they also shed blood and made sacrifice for the innocent blood. But here's the third one, and we'll rush through these pretty much. And this is the one most people don't know. One of the biggest functions of the Levites were they were teachers. They were involved in teaching God's word to God's people, and this is going to go all the way through the Old Testament. I want you to distinguish between the holy and the common. You must teach the decrees. Deuteronomy 38, teach Jacob your rules and your laws, and you turn the page. Even when the northern 10 tribes are carried away, they bring foreigners in, the lions are killing the people, and they talk to the king. He says, oh, send them a priest back to teach them the laws of their God. So even the Assyrian king is involved in sending priests from the northern 10 tribes back, because they're to be teaching them the law of the God of the land. And then you have these restoration periods where a godly king arises, and you'll see in 3:3, for a long time Israel was without the true God, and without a teaching priest, and without the law. And then here's a later king, the 3rd year of Jehoshaphat. They're going to send people out to teach the Levites, the priest. They taught in Judah, having the book of the law of the Lord with them. They went throughout all the cities of Judah, and they taught among the people. And then with Ezra, we're at the very end of the Old Testament. He's been in captivity. He is sent back by the Persians. And you'll find Ezra was a scribe, skilled in the law of Moses. The Lord, the God of Israel, had given him. And this is one of the great passages on teaching in all the Bible. This is 3:6 from Ezra 7 and 10. 3 things. He set his heart to study the law of the Lord, and to do it, and to teach his statutes and rules in Israel. He was a scribe, a man learned in the matters of the commandments of the Lord and his statutes. And then even Ezekiel will speak about there will be a time where there will be ministers in the oversight of the people ministering to the people, the Levitical priest. And you'll see just above 3:8, they will teach my people to distinguish the difference between the holy and the common, and show them how to distinguish between the clean and the unclean. When we come to Nehemiah, and we're coming down between 458 and 444, because Ezra's been there earlier, and then Nehemiah comes. Ezra's going to open the book in front of the people, and they're going to read. And the Levites, this is under 3:8, the Levites helped the people to understand the law while the people remained in their places. They read from the book, from the law of God, clearly. They gave the sense so the people understood the readings. Nehemiah was the governor, Ezra the priest and scribe, and the Levites taught the people. So this is a very significant role that God has given to the priests and the Levites all the way from Mount Sinai to the end of the Old Testament. And then here is, in our English Bibles, our last book in the Old Testament, Malachi. My covenant with Levi was a covenant of life and peace. I gave them to him that he might fear, and he feared me, and he stood in awe. True instruction was in his mouth, and no wrong was found in his lips. He walked with me in peace and uprightness, and he turned many from iniquity. For the lips of a priest should guard knowledge, and men should seek instruction from his mouth, for he is the messenger of the Lord of hosts. And so what we're going to see is that the Levites and the priest had very significant, and I'm going to call them civil responsibilities. We didn't go to all the stuff with leprosy and mold and on and on. The priests were the adjudicators of that and what's going to happen either with this person and on it would take place, involving the cities of refuge and the innocents and the other stuff, the worship that's in the temple. But they had a major teaching responsibility from God's perspective. And from Mount Sinai to the end of the Old Testament, God wanted the word to be taught. So 3 quick reviews. 1, God chose the tribe of Levi in place of the sacrifice of the firstborn. And we read that. That was the cost of deliverance from Egypt. Priests and Levites were selected by God to oversee. They had spiritual responsibilities, ceremonial responsibilities, civil responsibilities, and educational responsibilities. And again, I just thought as I read through this again, how significant God wanted this tribe of people around the tabernacle, closest to the service of that. But they were also in the middle. They were accessible to all the other people who were camped, who were there. And then they cross the Jordan, they go into the promised land. And rather than being in the tribe of Levi, then they're dispersed throughout these 48 cities, but especially the 6 cities of refuge were a major responsibility that they have. Jeremiah 18:18 is a very important passage. We're toward the very end, and there's something very negative here, but there's also something very instructive. Even in times of apostasy, Israel recognized the place of the priest. And remember, Jeremiah, the poor guy, is beaten, he's thrown into a well, he's told to shut up, he's persecuted, and all these other things. And then they said, come, let us make plots against Jeremiah. Wouldn't you love to sign up to be a prophet to a group of people like this? Let's make plots against Jeremiah. But here's the 3 things, and notice, number 1, the law shall not perish from the priest, nor counsel from the wise, nor the word from the prophet. Strike him with your words and pay no attention to him. But look at those 3 things. And God's going to say, both in Jeremiah and Ezekiel, the day will come when they will quit saying the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. And what they're saying is, we can basically act however we want to because the temple of the Lord is here and nothing's going to happen to this place. And Jeremiah's saying, no, God's going to destroy it. But look at those 3 things. The law is associated with the priest. Counsel is with the wise, and the word from the prophet. And here again is the significance of this teaching ministry that the priests and the Levites had. Last thought, the good kings. 3 out of the 20 are good most of the time. As a group, 6 are good to some degree or another. 2 are kind of so-so, and the rest of them are not good at all in the south. And in the north, 19 of them are all bad. When you have a good king, he typically restored the sacrificial service of the priest in the temple and the teaching ministry of the priests and Levites among God's people. Here's our last thought. Do you remember Ahaz? My vote for the worst king in the southern kingdom, one letter away from Ahab, nails the doors of the temple shut. If you're a priest, what do? You go back to one of those 48 cities and either start taking care of sheep or something, because you're not going to get supported by the people the whole time that the temple is shut down. And they had these cities, and there's times that they became self-supporting and went back to take care of themselves and their families. And then when there was a restoration movement, then they came back and they served in the temple. But God spread them out, kind of like leaven, throughout the whole country. And that was the specific responsibilities of the Levites and the priests within that group. And just anticipate, what does it mean then with this shadow when we're going to find out that as Christians, God wants each of us to be priests today? And we'll anticipate that, Lord willing, next week.